I'm Alexia Russell, and today on The Detail, I've been looking at Merriam-Webster's very interesting social media posts, and one of them has been a grid of 16 words that people have voted on under various categories, like the most overrated word and the hardest word to pronounce, and the best word. I was kind of fascinated by that, so I thought I'd get a couple of wordsmiths in to help me dissect it and to perhaps give me an idea of how we lay out words and what makes them wonderful and what makes them awful and all the other things we can discuss around them. And so with me is Tim Murphy, who's not at all here because he's my boss. He's the co-owner of Newsroom. But you also, Tim, were the editor-in-chief of The Herald. So you've had a taste of both audio and you do raw politics. So you've done live video recording, you've written headlines, editorials, those things, those wonderful erudite things that spin a tale in superb language. What's the difference between the written word in terms of great communication and speaking on a video podcast?
I think written words need to be brief and clear and need to be shorn almost of any kind of fake or faux erudition. I think it comes across very poorly in written text if someone's trying too hard, because it actually makes the reader stop. And the key thing to being able to read text, I think, is to be able to flow and have your neurons keep connecting and keep understanding and keep getting to the point that you need to. Whereas I think with tone in vocal, audio obviously, tone and even the pace that can be attended and also the emphasis that can be given on words can help in expression. And so sometimes you can get away, I think, with a bit more florid language, and the Shane Joneses of this world prove that, I think, where they dip into their vocab bag verbally.
Today, industry sees the long-term consequences of the shallow emerald mannequin thinking that's driven energy policy, this faint green vision that somehow we can keep the lights on with unicorn kisses.
And I don't care about these woke-riddled munchkins who want to fry eggs on solar panels.
And it comes across. I don't think he loses people greatly, Shane. But, I think if you wrote Shane Jones down the way he speaks, it would be a sort of a scramble, a bit of a spaghetti.
I tried to follow one of his speeches once, they give you the notes, and after about 3 paragraphs, I realised this was not going to go well. It did not match.
No, and if you tried to do it for his leader, Winston Peters, it would be an altogether different, less erudite, but very difficult to make things finish and start and where things are going,
See, that's really interesting because I almost thought it would be the opposite. I know you're inhaling these words with different senses. One is obviously you're hearing it, one is you're seeing it. But I would have thought for radio, the aim of it would be to get as concise as possible using the least ambiguous words, because you only have that moment of time. You can't go back on live radio and say, oh, what was that?
True. I think brevity everywhere, but probably simplicity more than brevity, that you're not going to stop and trap and sort of trip listeners. And for readers, it's the same, except I think those added dimensions that the voice and audio can give to words and sentences and phrases can get you past people's confusion away, even if it's fast and quick. Whereas I think the eye trips and stops. And I think I read somewhere that Warwick Roger, who was the former Metro editor, had a sort of maybe it was a playful technique of dropping a word into every piece that he wrote that would make people go to the dictionary and look it up. But, when you think about that, probably Warwick was going to the dictionary to look up the word he wanted people to go to the dictionary for. And so it's, it's a stop and it's a challenge for people, which I think great communication doesn't challenge. It can entertain, it can kind of enliven, it can make you smile and think, well, that was well said and done and that was well chosen, but it shouldn't stop you abruptly.
That's very interesting because our own Steve Brownius, in writing a review of Paddy Gower's autobiography, he used the word amanuensis, which I had to look up both the word and the pronunciation, and it means ghostwriter. And it refers to Eugene Bingham, who actually wrote the Murphy. Now, how did that slip through your red pen?
I think I saw that word and I think I knew what it meant. But when you highlighted it to me, I didn't know what it meant when I thought about it. And I had to go and look it up too. But in context, I think it flowed. And it, I sort of took it straight away as a muse with a pen. Someone who was, someone you'd download to or share with, and they would then, put it in writing. But yes, it's the exact point. You've looked at that and thought that didn't work for me. And so the fancy word didn't achieve what it ought to have.
I kind of loved it because now I've got a new word for Eugene. But he is a beautiful writer, Steve. Does he get away with it because people kind of expect something different from him?
Yes, but I think his genius is not in over-challenging people. He's a conversationalist in his writing, and he's idiosyncratic, and his anecdotes are real people's anecdotes. So I don't think he often confuses or often tries too hard to be a sort of a scholar or to impress you with his vocab. His using that word there though that you mentioned was one that he shouldn't have used, and I should have taken it out.
No, it was lovely. A new word. Welcome to the discussion, Jeremy Rees, who
Thank you for having me.
Is not only a radio man, but used to be a newspaper man, and also extremely well read, because we've talked to you before about, Booker Prize winning books.
Absolutely. For the last couple of years, I've tried to read all of the Booker Prize shortlist to keep in touch with what people are reading and writing, and it's wonderful, actually.
Do you ever come across books where you're running to the dictionary every second page?
Oh, absolutely. In fact, there's a very good example of that in the most recent Booker Prizes with Anne Michaels, Held. She wrote Fugitive Pieces, which was a huge novel in the 1990s. And she writes beautifully, very similar to what Tim's talking about with Steve Bronius, and then throws in a difficult word that you've never heard of. So asymptotic sent me off to the dictionary, and you're now going to ask me exactly what it means, but it's in the midst of a long discussion of science, and I had to go and look it up, and I've completely forgotten what it was.
Now we see the asymptotic behavior of the graph of 1 over x. The asymptotic behavior of it is that as x approaches infinity, we get closer and closer to 0.
Yeah, no, I don't think that helps. Let's move on. What do you think is the difference between, as a journalist, writing for a newspaper for the eye to see and broadcasting in your word choice?
I think in both you're trying to keep it simple. You're trying to use the good Anglo-Saxon words that George Orwell always told us that we should use, rather than Latinate words, ones that people are using all the time. But of course, there is this beautiful sound of words with people who are great broadcasters. They sound that rolls beautifully off the tongue. And then they use silences very well and pauses. Kim Hill was a mistress or a master at pausing and letting that do all of the work rather than just having to use the words. And I admired that enormously. But in news, you do a lot of things where you will write down the pronunciation of a word because you're quite conscious you'll trip over things. So we will actually go and there's a word I think we might talk about in the Merriam-Webster dictionary list, shenanigans. And some people might actually write that out. So, shenanigans, so they can say it easily when they're sort of reading the news.
But our shenanigans are cheeky and fun.
Yeah, his shenanigans are cruel and tragic.
Which makes them not shenanigans at all, really.
Love a bit of shenanigans. And you have brought us to our list, so let's have a look at this grid. So some of these words are quite interesting, and I'll start with what people think is the funniest word, kerfuffle.
It was quite the kerfuffle.
I love the word kerfuffle. It sounds to me like Snuffleupagus, which was a character, a children's character, I think, in the 60s and 70s. So I think kerfuffle is wonderful.
What about you, Tim?
I like it, but when I looked at that, I thought the one that attracted me most is buffoon, because I think it says everything without saying anything, really. It's a very short, odd little word, but you get everything about that person.
So,
and we
someone
all know
who's
them.
quite clownish and
almost open to ridicule.
Yeah. It is. It's a very good. It's a political word almost. It's something you see in politics.
Well, you might say that, but we couldn't possibly.
I came across a good word similar to buffoon just recently, the word dolt. And it's so short, sharp, and says exactly what the person is.
Is it German? Sounds German.
It does sound German.
Yeah, but it sounds very effective.
Well, my associate producer, Davina, likes doofus. No, dingus. Dingus, and doofus is very similar. Wonderful insults.
Pawnee is literally the greatest town in the country. Literally? Literally. Literally? There's literally nothing in this world that you cannot do.
Can we talk most overrated word?
Go on.
Because in the Merriam they had literally, which is, so obvious now. But I think, especially among sports people and even stars and celebs when they're interviewed about their current state of mind and the experience they're going through, they use this word surreal.
To be honest, it still feels very surreal.
And they have no clue about what surrealism is or surreal or anything else. And they probably mean unreal or super real or something, but they're surrealing it and it's just devalued itself.
So some words are like that, though. Are they? Like nonplussed is another most confusing word, where people have wrongly interpreted what it means. It's got a life of its own. Yeah. Suddenly it's a different word.
And there's no turning back. We won't put that genie back in the bottle.
You almost have to delete those words from the dictionary because they mean two completely opposite things.
I've got another one, though, like your one then, that actually the word and what you'd think its opposite are mean exactly the same thing. And I've had to look this up before in writing because I wanted to use unravelled. And I thought, okay, what does revelled mean? But revel means the same thing. They both mean to sort of split and spray out. So it was a very unusual experience to have a revelled and unravelled. So use them any way you like.
So why do we put the prefix on?
No idea.
Because it sounds more likely.
More literal.
No idea. And hopefully I'll be corrected by someone more scholarly than the dictionaries I was.
But talking about surreal, when Tim was the editor of The Herald and I worked for Tim, he used to occasionally ban words that had become overused or were wrongly used or he felt was sort of had become, certainly overused. And I adopted this approach during the Olympic Games when I was running some of the coverage. And the word that I banned was surreal. And it came after listening to the women's sevens team coming back excited, overjoyed at winning a gold medal. They lit up, as they always do, the sporting world, and every one of them got off the plane and asked what it was like to win. They said it was surreal, and it's not surreal. They weren't standing in the middle of a, Salvador Dali nightmarish sort of moment in the middle of a stadium. It was hyper real. They'd won something that they'd been aiming for 4 years. It was simply the wrong word, and it shouldn't grate. I tried not to be churlish, but I felt that it had become a cliche.
What about words that really turn to ashes in your mouth, words that really make you shudder? There is a really obvious one on this grid from Merriam-Webster, and I'm going to say it, moist. Who hates that word?
Everybody.
Absolutely everybody.
Everybody hates it.
Moist is one of few words in the English language with the power to make your skin crawl. And it makes sense. The word sounds kind of disgusting. But scientists have discovered that the way it sounds isn't the biggest problem. Moist is part of a phenomenon known as word aversion. It refers to words with an inoffensive meaning, yet when you hear them, like crevice and phlegm, they have the unique power to disgust people.
Because actually it should be a lovely little word, isn't it? It's sort of slightly damp feeling. You should be able to walk through the forest and everything is moist around you.
Or eat chocolate cake and it's beautifully moist.
It should be a wonderful word, but it seems to pull people up. It's a little alarm bell in the back of their head saying, I think this is going to say something I don't really want to say on the radio.
I'll say it for you. It means bodily fluids. That's all people think about.
Yeah. Well, I'm glad you went straight to the concrete.
Although I think women in particular shudder when they hear that word.
I think it's clever to swear.
I mean, some swear words can be very, very effective.
On the Merriam-Webster list, there is word bed, word that makes the most sense. But I think there are swear words which are fabulous for the same reason. They have this sort of a hard consonant in them and you can make them sound like absolutely anything. They can say a myriad of things. I think they're wonderful words.
But once again, the spoken version of them is far more effective than the written version of them.
Can I take you on a small tour of a swear
Please.
word? So the four-letter word SH something T is
Shit.
possibly the most deployed and widely descriptive word in English. And can I give you just some definitions using the word sh? Dog shit, very poor quality.
You can say it, Tim.
Bullshit, not true. Horse shit, nonsense. Ape shit, rambunctious. Bat shit, insane. Chicken shit, cowards. Rat shit, poor quality. No shit, obviously. Holy shit, mind-blowing. Hot shit, very good. Dip shit, a total dumbass. Tough shit, take it or leave it. Jack shit, nothing. And the shit, perfection. So I give you shit.
Brilliant. Are there any other words we know of that deploy themselves so usefully?
Well, English is a very strange language, and people joining, English must just tear their hair out with that kind of breadth of description.
Yeah. Favourite words, or words that are poetry to you? Now, this grid has soliloquy. I don't think I can take it or leave that one. I mean, my favourite word, I think, is phosphorescence. Not just because of how it sounds, which I do love, and unless you had a lisp, it's quite lovely to say, but because it has connotations of, it evokes memories for me of being on a boat at night in the Bay of Islands and dipping my hand through the water and seeing those pearls of phosphorescence fall off my hand. And that's why I love it. So when people say their favourite word, do you think they mean how it sounds to them and rolls around in their mouth, or do you think it's a word that is evocative for them? Or both?
I think both. Look, my favourites, I think, I've got an odd one, which is descant, the singing above a sort of a note in a choir. I've always thought that was just beautiful, the sound of a word. It doesn't necessarily explain what it is, but I've always thought it was such a lovely sound to that word. And then I think we're very lucky in New Zealand as well. I know we're talking English words, but with the word turanga waiwai, I think that is a beautiful sounding word, and what an evocative thing, the place where I stand, or a place to stand. It's a perfect word, I think.
I think there are some other words in Māori that really, mahi is like, even if you kind of didn't know what that meant, in a context you would just, it sounds like work. The beautiful fantail piwakawaka, and that really does
piwakawaka is beautiful.
Envision that fan flitting out far more than
and the flitting of it.
Yeah, the flitting. Yeah. So is onomatopoeia really vital to these kind of favourite words, the way they sound?
Yeah, I have one that I think is one of my favourites, and it's for that reason, is aplomb. I think that if you thought of an action or a character or a person who somehow had carried out something with aplomb, you'll know what it is because of that sound and that kind of feel. And that's just one of those that has that kind of experiential thing you were talking about earlier, that you'll remember it because of somebody, probably, who carried themselves with aplomb.
I quite like tizzy. I just imagine a ball of string all messed up and tangled.
Yeah. Well, I wonder if it goes both ways. The word sounds or evokes the action or the thing, and then over time the thing starts to evoke the word, or starts to actually sort of associate in your mind with the word. So it actually interacts in both ways. I think of it a little bit with that phrase, in their pomp. I've always thought that had the same sort of thing, that sort of pomp and ceremony and the sort of person being puffed up. But actually it's a very small word that doesn't really sound like, a person in their prime. And yet it seems to work.
What else is on this? Oh, the worst word. Now, Merriam-Webster says it's phlegm, which I don't object to too much, really.
It is pretty foul, isn't it?
Yeah, I suppose so.
Well, the thing is
it's in the
foul,
moist
isn't
department, isn't it?
Yeah, well, that's right. It gets there, doesn't it?
I mean, learnings, to me, is the worst word. Learnings.
I'm going to see your learnings and raise you a versing.
As soon as the kids start playing a game, who are we versing this week? Stop it.
I know.
Just stop it.
Again, the first coaches, managers and parents who heard that ought to be bloody prosecuted for not having nailed it then and there.
But you can't stop that, can you? I mean, we can rage against the...
we're very old and, we're clinging to old certainties, and podiumed is another.
Yeah.
We podiumed at the Olympics. But you just got to groan and say, well, here we go. It's changing again. And, yeah. Jeremy mentioned before that when I was at the Herald as editor, I banned words. That sounds terrible, like banning books or burning books. But it was more to eliminate overuse, as you said, and cliche, but because also, and listeners might not know, or they probably recognise it but don't know, that we talk about in the industry of journalese, a sort of language that only journalists deploy and words that only journalists deploy. And there are words like plethora and beleaguered and imbroglio and gaffe, G-A-F-F-E, and tryst, and these kinds of words that no one you walk into on the street or sit down with over dinner in your life deploys these words, but journalists use them thinking maybe that they're fancy words, maybe that they carry something that people don't get normally. And so there's a journalese that comes in, which was what I was warring against, and I hope to keep warring against.
Like a raft of charges.
Yeah. And everything's amid something, even though there's no actual mids to be in a mid of. And so,
I think also there are some words that are actually just imprecise. And as journalists, you should be trying to aim for the precise word or phrase. One I'm worried about a little bit at the moment is the discussion of the far right. And I'm not sure that the phrase far right is actually capturing what some of these political parties in Europe are doing or thinking they're doing. And so I've been trying to suggest that we actually use a much more precise formulation on it, whatever that happens to be. Are they nationalist? Are they populist? Are they, because I'm not sure they are actually right in their policies.
Well, yes, because it has obviously a different meaning. Yeah. All right, just to finish off, who knows how many times bi-weekly is?
I'm going to get myself wrong here and say twice a week, but is it once every fortnight?
Well, it's both.
Ah.
It can mean twice a week, which is what I thought it was. It also can mean fortnightly. But it's my way of thinking, why would you not just say fortnightly?
That is odd.
It's another one of those words that's almost cancelled itself out.
Well, pity the poor English as a second language students sitting around, various places in the Auckland City and Wellington City now learning these things.
That's why then they hand you your phone because they've typed out their sentence and Google Translate does the rest. Well, thank you very much, gentlemen, for sharing that with me. I very much appreciate it. It's a lot of food for thought.
I'm going to use my most, the word that I regard as my best word to you, and to finish, peace.
Oh, that's a beautiful word.
That's a lovely word.
That's it for this week. The Detail is a newsroom production supported by RNZ and New Zealand On Air. This episode was engineered by William Saunders and produced by Gwen McClure and Davina Zimmer. Thanks to Newsroom's Tim Murphy and RNZ's Jeremy Rees. I'm Alexia Russell. Enjoy your weekend. Fabulous word, weekend.